Okay, during our investigation, we found that sine of 2 theta is the same thing as sine, or 2 times the sine of theta times the cosine of theta, and cosine of 2 theta is the same as cosine squared theta minus sine squared theta, which could also be written as 1 minus 2 sine squared theta, or 2 cosine squared theta minus 1. Okay, so those are the options you can use for the double angle trigonometric identities. Okay, number 1. If sine of theta equals 4/5 and cosine of theta is 3/5, find the exact values of sine of 2 theta. Okay, so sine of 2 theta, remember, is 2 sine of cosine theta. So I have 2, and then sine of theta is just 4/5, and cosine of theta is 3/5. So that's the same as 2 times 4, 24 over 25. Okay, what about tangent of 2 theta? Well, to find tangent of 2 theta, we would just need to find cosine of 2 theta and then divide it from that. So cosine of 2 theta would be cosine squared theta. We could actually use any of these, but let's use the 1 minus 2 sine squared theta formula. So it'll be 1 minus 2, and then sine squared is 4/5, so 4/5 squared. So that would be equal to 1 minus 2 times 16 over 25, okay, which is equal to negative 32, 25, so it would be negative 7/25. Okay. 2a. If cosine of a is 1/3, then find cosine of 2a. So we could say that cosine of 2a is equal to 2 cosine squared of a minus 1. So that would be 2 times 1/3 squared minus 1. So that would be 2 times 1/9 minus 1. So 2/9 minus 1, which is equal to negative 7/9. If sine of alpha is negative 2/3, then find the cosine of alpha. So sine of alpha being negative 2/3, that means that we're talking about maybe like this angle. So 2/3, negative 2/3. Is that in this range, pi and 3/2 pi? Yeah, it is. So now it says find the exact value of cosine alpha. To do that, we're going to have to do Pythagorean theorem or something, right? Because we're going to have to figure out what this length is. So let's see. Something squared plus 2 squared equals 3 squared, which is 9. X squared equals 5. So x is equal to square root of 5. So this is square root of 5. So cosine of alpha would be negative square root of 5 divided by 3. The sine of 2 alpha is going to be 2 times the sine of alpha times the cosine of alpha. So sine of alpha, we just know that it's negative 2/3, right? And cosine of alpha, we know is negative square root of 5 over a third. So the answer is no negative, because the negatives multiply and become positive, 4 square root of 5 over 9. Okay. Number 5. So we could use the formula cosine of 2 alpha equals 1 minus 2 sine squared alpha. And we know that cosine 2 alpha is negative 7/9, so we put that in, is equal to 1 minus 2 sine squared alpha. And then now we're just going to solve for alpha. So we move this to the left side, 2 sine squared alpha. We add 7/9 to both sides. We get 1 plus 7/9 equals 16/9. So we have sine squared of alpha equals, and we divide both sides by 2, we get 8/9 here on the right. And then we take the square root of both sides, we get sine alpha is equal to the square root of 8/3. If we draw a triangle with the sine of square root of 8/3, then we just don't know this side to find the cosine, but we can use Pythagorean's theorem. So x squared plus 8 square root of 8 squared, which is 8, is equal to 3 squared, which is 9. So x squared equals 1, x equals 1, right? So the cosine of alpha is x, or 1 divided by 3. And yes, and the sine of alpha is square root of 8/3. Find the exact value of cosine pi over 12 plus sine pi over 12 squared. Okay, so let's see. We'll use FOIL. We get cosine squared plus 2 sine cosine plus sine squared. And so cosine squared and sine squared become 1, right? So then you end up with 1 plus 2 sine cosine. And when I say 2 sine cosine, I mean 2 sine of pi over 12 times the cosine of pi over 12. Okay? And then remember that the sine of 2 theta is equal to 2 sine of theta plus cosine of theta. So look, you have 2 sine of theta times cosine of theta here. So you could put this as 1 plus the sine of 2 times pi over 12. And guess what? You know the sine of pi over 6. This is pi over 6. The sine of pi over 6 is the sine of 30 degrees, which is a half. So 1 plus a half equals 1.5.